It's no secret we live in an extremely overstimulating society. When I went off to college, I was so excited. College in a lot of ways opens so many doors for you. It expands your horizons in a lot of ways. I really thrived in college because Orange County is definitely a little bit more slower, and I felt like the college town that I lived in, the environment that I was in, really fulfilled the part of me that loved the hustle and bustle. In college, I really learned that I am really someone who thrives in more urban settings, in cities, having places to be, constantly being on the go. I loved constantly switching environments, having a million different cafes to choose from. And that is definitely a huge privilege. The reality is, living in a city where you have access to 15 different coffee shops at any given minute is a huge privilege. And that is not the norm for a lot of people, even though that's what social media depicts. When I was graduating college, I was definitely worried about moving back home to Orange County post-grad and transitioning back into slower living. As much as I love Orange County, this is where my family is, this is where my community is in a lot of ways. I was worried about just transitioning into a lot slower of a life than I was used to for the past few years. At first, it was definitely an adjustment. Moving back here really allowed me to appreciate slow life in a different way. But as much as I like to call life slow in Orange County, it's actually really not that slow in the grand scheme of things. So this summer I spent a month in Mauritania. To paint a picture, Mauritania is a very conservative society, and culturally there's just kind of this pushback when it comes to third spaces in general. So there's not a ton of third spaces. And so Nouakchott, the city, definitely has been investing in cafes and restaurants because that's pretty much all there is. They obviously don't have bars, clubs. You get that scene. We don't have that, but we also just don't have movie theaters and a lot of other third spaces that we take for granted in the US. But it's kind of interesting because there aren't as many third spaces, it really forces people to spend a lot of time at home or spend a lot of time at each other's houses. You really see that in the way the society is kind of set up. It's a very communal society. It's a very community oriented society. Growing up, every summer when we'd go back home, it was so weird to me to see houses where they would just have an open door policy so people could just come in and out uninvited. Meals were 10, 15, 20 people all gathered around eating together. It's a lot of time spent with people and truly present with one another. And so I guess when you have that presence, you don't really have the need for a lot of the third spaces that we have, because true purpose of what a third space is for is ultimately to connect people. And sometimes I think we can forget that. Third spaces are meant to be a place where people can really come together, form community, and also just expand their community. I love going back home to Mauritania, don't get me wrong, but one aspect I definitely struggle with every single time is just how slow paced life is. I think Orange County is slow. Try going to Mauritania. And this trip in particular really made me confront the fact that I am very uncomfortable with boredom. I'm very uncomfortable with silence and just space in my life where nothing is really going on. There would be times while I was on vacation where I'd be at family members' houses for hours and hours on end. And in any natural conversation or experience with another person, there are going to be periods of silence. There are going to be lulls. I really tried to spend as little time on my phone as possible, especially when I was with certain family members, because I don't get to go to Mauritania often. I only get to go every few years for just a couple weeks at a time. So my time with my family is very limited. I don't want to be wasting time being on social media. There was one day where I spent half the day at my grandma's house, and my grandma's house is definitely a lot more low-key than the average Mauritanian household. There's not as many people coming in and out of the house. I was telling my dad it's honestly very peaceful and very quiet. And so a lot of the times when I would be there, there was just a lot of silence and quiet. It was the first time in a long time where I haven't filled the silence in my life with scrolling on social media. And it led to a lot of reflection on just the way that I am very uncomfortable with silence and boredom in my own life and how that affects a lot of my relationships with people, my social interactions. So we're gonna dive into it. I cannot remember the last time where I actually stood in a grocery line without scrolling on my phone. And I'm sure we all do it. It's seemingly harmless. This habit of constantly resorting to scrolling when we're bored keeps us from truly living in the moment and experiencing life. When you think about it, you can't truly live in the moment and be fully present and experience a moment to its full capacity when you're interrupting it by scrolling on TikTok. And that constant behavior really erodes at our ability to be grounded and to be present with the real world. That is one of the blessings of praying 5 times a day as a Muslim. No matter what, we're forced to stop whatever we're doing in our day. We're forced to disconnect from the physical world and be grounded and pray. And sometimes that is so hard, but even just taking that second to do that really snaps you back into reality and reorients what is truly important in life. When we're constantly interrupting real life with social media, it disorients reality. It also, I think, has an effect on the way that you show up in conversation with people. I feel like we have a really, really big problem of not being able to listen in conversation. I think a lot of the times silence is really uncomfortable in conversation. I've experienced this myself, but when you really unpack it, silence is necessary in conversation. Silence is important. It's a part of the healthy flow of conversation and the interaction that you have with other people. And a conversation that doesn't have silence is not natural. But I think we're so used to everything being edited and curated, conversations being packaged so seamlessly, that when there is silence in conversations, it feels almost unnatural. And the problem with that is whenever we're spending time with friends or catching up with friends, whenever you're having a conversation with someone, especially someone new where you're not as comfortable with that person, you constantly feel the need to fill up the space in the conversation. And what ends up happening is you're not actually listening to each other. I think a lot of the times we have a really, really big problem of not being able to listen to one another. I was listening to a podcast recently where they were talking about people that struggle with small talk, which I am the biggest perpetrator of that. I hate small talk, and I've always said, like, I just hate it because it feels very shallow. But then they were talking about the fact that people that say that they hate small talk and they feel it's very shallow are just people who don't want to put in the work to truly form a connection with people and put themselves out there. They're not okay with being uncomfortable with the initial awkwardness of the situation, and they struggle with not needing to fill the silences and not needing for interactions to be perfect. And it really made me unpack that because I hate small talk. I find it so hard when I'm in line at the grocery store, just having that like 5-minute interaction when I used to be so natural at it. And I feel like over time, I'm only getting worse and worse and worse. And I think it's because I am just so used to everything in my life being so curated, being on social media and even curating conversations like this, editing myself and seeing other people constantly edit themselves. It like distorts what human interaction and what human connection is supposed to be like. It's supposed to be messy and rough, and it's not always going to make sense. There are going to be awkward pauses, there are going to be awkward jokes made or things that just don't land exactly with people, but it's really about just being authentic. I've always prided myself on being a great listener, but I also have been catching myself recently not listening to people in the way that I used to. I've caught myself thinking of, oh, what am I gonna say next? Especially when it comes to people that I don't really know. I'm so worried about the conversation going well that I'm not allowing myself to fully experience the conversation. A toxic habit that I have done in the past and that I still sometimes do is whenever I'm in social settings where I don't really know anyone, or I'm in a room with a lot of people that I don't know, sometimes I will literally go on my phone to avoid small talk or to avoid awkward interactions with people because I have a genuine fear of that. And a lot of the times I kind of write it off as just me being introverted or me being an introvert, but I think that's only holding myself back from growing and being able to form connections with people. When you think of your childhood, a time where you were so creative. Children, especially young children, are so funny. They have such a particular way of expressing themselves, and they have such a distinct personality and view on the world. Part of that is because they haven't really experienced the harsh realities of the real world. They haven't experienced bullying quite yet. They haven't experienced people judging them or having certain prejudices for the way that they express themselves or present in the world. But it's also because children also just have such an abundance of boredom and silence in their lives. This is definitely changing a lot, but growing up in the early 2000s during a time where technology was just getting started, and also just being raised in a household where my parents really pushed us to spend time outside, to play with dolls, to really just spend as little time as possible on screens and watching TV, really forced me and my sisters to be creative and expressive and to just have fun in a lot of ways. And I'm so grateful that we were raised in that environment. My sisters and I quite literally shared a Kindle Fire until I was in late middle school. The three of us were sharing one tablet, and while it was really frustrating and annoying at times, that environment is the reason I am the way I am today. I feel like my sisters and I had such a fun and vivid childhood. We spent so much time outside. We wrote plays. We were super, super creative. And that was because we had such an abundance of time in our lives. I found this out recently. My mom would not let us watch TV on school nights, only on the weekends. And so after school, when we finished our homework and everything was done, it was go outside, write, read, or play. And play is so important to the development of any human being. A lot of who you are right now comes from your childhood and comes from who you were as a young child. And I really do feel like a lot of my passions today really stem from who I was as a young child. Like, I always loved writing plays and writing stories. I had a phase in middle school where I was writing 5 manuscripts on Wattpad, and that really translates to a lot of my current interests and who I am today. But I wouldn't be who I am today if I wasn't given the space to become that person. And I think one of the worries that I personally have, at least with this current environment and this generation, is that kids don't really have that environment anymore. We all have an iPad kid in our lives, and it's scary to see how much time at such a young age that kids are spending glued to screen. That's not to judge parents at all, because at the end of the day, it is the environment that we live in, and it is extremely hard to set those boundaries. And regardless of whether or not a parent sets those boundaries for their kids, the real world exists. Eventually, kids are going to go out and experience social media and the effects that it has in all aspects of their lives. But I think when you get older, you have autonomy over your life. And for me personally, I really want to prioritize more boredom, more silence in my life, because I have noticed that when I am constantly doing something, and when my time is constantly filled with something, when I'm constantly being stimulated, I don't have the opportunity to really think. I don't have the opportunity to be creative, and that affects my ability to be expressive. It affects my ability to be in tune with my emotions. Half the time I'm living my life on autopilot. When I look back at the periods of my life where I was most creative, when I had the idea to start my podcast, disclaimers aside, those were moments in my life where I had a lot of space in my life. The times where I've had the most ideas, the times that I was most creative, were the times when I had the space to even think of those ideas. A couple months ago, I listened to the podcast that Jay Shetty did with Melinda Gates, and one of the things that she says she always prioritizes in her life is making sure that she builds in time for silence, quiet time, usually in the morning, because that is how she gains clarity in her life. That is the time that a lot of her best ideas come. When we went to the Terjit Oasis in Mauritania, it was such a surreal experience. Just the peace that I felt in that oasis. People had their tents set up, they were lounging, they were making a tea, sitting in silence, and just being so disconnected from the real world. I truly felt so grounded in that moment, and it felt like such an eye-opener to how big the world is and to what I'm exactly missing when I don't build in silence and boredom into my life. And that doesn't have to look like just sitting in bed doing nothing, but going on walks and not listening to a podcast or music, going on drives and maybe not listening to anything, sitting down and just journaling all of your thoughts or brain dumping, waiting in line at the grocery store and not going on your phone, or even at a doctor's office just building a little bit of that into your life makes such a difference on your mental health and the way that you show up in a lot of ways, and even just your perspective on the world. I know this is something that I personally definitely want to work on, but I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. If you guys are not already, I would love if you guys could take a second to subscribe, and I will see you guys in my next one. Bye.